This is the School of Social Sciences of the Ateneo de Manila University. The School of Social Sciences, or SOS, is home to some of Ateneo's most in-demand degree courses, making SOS the largest of the 5 Loyola schools in terms of student population, faculty members, degree programs, academic departments, and research centers. Our faculty, researchers, and students help fulfill the university's mission by addressing the complex questions of our time, such as, how do we create a prosperous society that benefits all? How do we address the major challenges to democracy? How do we transform social structures and relations of power? What constitutes human thriving across different populations and domains? How do we meet human needs while considering the planet's limits? Can our history of adaptability and ingenuity strengthen us? Here, our students learn to connect individuals and groups in new ways and help make institutions and systems fulfill their mission in society. They learn to address social inequalities and promote social justice as professionals for and with others. When you study in SOS, you will be equipped with analytical and practical skills for a variety of work settings, such as archival, qualitative, and ethnographic research, quantitative analysis and modeling, communication, clinical and social interventions. We promote a way of doing the social sciences that is anchored on interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary practices, local and global realities, critical thinking and problem solving, which cover deep time, historical, and contemporary periods. The School of Social Sciences offers undergraduate and graduate training, as well as short courses and diploma programs. This academic and professional training is enriched by partnerships with organizations and institutions in the Philippines and overseas. These partnerships bridge science and practice, academe and profession, and the university and the public. Our alumni include national leaders and practitioners who embody the Ignatian values of magis, cura personalis, discernment, and service rooted in justice and love. In SOS, we impart new thinking and skills for the complex questions and challenges of today's world. Come and join us at the Ateneo School of Social Sciences. This is the School of Social Sciences of the Ateneo de Manila University. The School of Social Sciences, or SOS, is home to some of Ateneo's most in-demand degree courses, making SOS the largest of the 5 Loyola schools in terms of student population, faculty members, degree programs, academic departments, and research centers. Our faculty, researchers, and students help fulfill the university's mission by addressing the complex questions of our time, such as, how do we create a prosperous society that benefits all? How do we address the major challenges to democracy? How do we transform social structures and relations of power? What constitutes human thriving across different populations and domains? How do we meet human needs while considering the planet's limits? Can our history of adaptability and ingenuity strengthen us? Here, our students learn to connect individuals and groups in new ways and help make institutions and systems fulfill their mission in society. They learn to address social inequalities and promote social justice as professionals for and with others. When you study in SOS, You will be equipped with analytical and practical skills for a variety of work settings, such as archival, qualitative, and ethnographic research, quantitative analysis and modeling, communication, clinical and social interventions. We promote a way of doing the social sciences that is anchored on interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary practices, local and global realities, critical thinking, and problem solving, which cover deep time, historical, and contemporary periods. The School of Social Sciences offers undergraduate and graduate training, as well as short courses and diploma programs. This academic and professional training is enriched by partnerships with organizations and institutions in the Philippines and overseas. These partnerships bridge science and practice, academe and profession, and the university and the public. Our alumni include national leaders and practitioners who embody the Ignatian values of magis, cura personalis, discernment, and service rooted in justice and love. In SOS, we impart new thinking and skills for the complex questions and challenges of today's world. Come and join us at the Ateneo School of Social Sciences. This is the School of Social Sciences of the Ateneo de Manila University. The School of Social Sciences, or SOS, is home to some of Ateneo's most in-demand degree courses, making SOS the largest of the 5 Loyola schools in terms of student population, faculty members, degree programs, academic departments, and research centers. Our faculty, researchers, and students help fulfill the university's mission by addressing the complex questions of our time, such as how do we create a prosperous society that benefits all? How do we address the major challenges to democracy? How do we transform social structures and relations of power? What constitutes human thriving across different populations and domains? How do we meet human needs while considering the planet's limits? Can our history of adaptability and ingenuity strengthen us? Here, our students learn to connect individuals
we will
and groups
begin
in new
in
ways
2 minutes.
and help make institutions and systems fulfill their mission in society.
Kasama ko siya.
They learn to address social inequalities and promote social justice as professionals for and with others. When you study in SOS, you will be equipped with analytical and practical skills for a variety of work settings, such
Yung isang window. Display settings? Okay. Si Morny ba yan?
Morning, si Sir
Morny? Morny! Ikaw pala yan.
Yung display set.
This on the nilagay ko na yun. What's the first presentation?
This one. This one.
This one. Yan.
This one.
Nilagay ko na lang siya dito.
So we have our last couple of attendees coming in. Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. We are delighted to have you join us for the Asian Peacebuilders Scholarship Program's Peace Exchanges, Conversations on a Volatile World. I am Melissa Lau from the Political Science Department, and I will be your host for today. The Asian Peacebuilders Scholarship Program, or APS, is a shared initiative of the Nippon Foundation and the University for Peace and the Ateneo de Manila University. The dual degree program endeavors to train Asian professionals to become peace-building practitioners and development workers ready to take up leading positions in organizations across the globe. The APS program is hosted by the School of Social Sciences of the Ateneo de Manila University. May we call on Dean Bopip Saloma Akpedonu to officially open the APS Peace Exchanges.
Our distinguished guests from the UN-mandated University for Peace, Dr. Francisco Rojas Aravena, Rector, Dr. Juan Carlos Sainz Borgo, Vice Rector, Dr. Olivia Sylvester, Director of the Department of Environment and Development, our host from the Ateneo de Manila University, Dr. Jose Joel Canuday, Chair of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, Dr. Jennifer Oreta, Ricardo Leong Institute for Global and Area Studies, and Father Jose M. Cruz, S.J., former Dean of the School of Social Sciences, faculty, staff, students, alumni, especially of the Asian Peacebuilders Scholarship Program. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Today we launched an embodiment of an idea of an event such as the Asian Peacebuilders Scholarship Program's Peace Exchanges Conversations on a Volatile World. We dreamt this up in December last year. As we all know, dreaming is a way of planning. Peace Exchanges is a three-part series of conversations on peace and transdisciplinary social development. The first part of Peace Exchanges will, as we see today, will feature faculty members from Ateneo de Manila's University, partner university, University for Peace in Costa Rica. The second part will feature faculty members from Ateneo de Manila University. The final part will be conversations on the contributions of our graduates to peace and social development. The first offering, today's conversations, is designed where there is a presenter from the University for Peace and a main interlocutor from the School of Social Sciences. These interlocutors, who will be introduced later, will draw from their own research and engagement in the Philippines in the spirit of Habermas' theory of communicative action, where private people, Dr. Mary Acelis, Dr. Jennifer Oreta, and Dr. Joel Canuday, and us here in the audience, come together to discuss publicly relevant topics in an ideal speech community, an ideal speech situation where consensus is arrived at rationally, discursively, and free of coercion and manipulation. We try to do this in 2 hours, but we may not achieve that fully, but at least we'll try to have some ideal speech situation in the next 2 hours. So there is a main interlocutor just to ensure the conversation will start, But otherwise, anyone in the gallery should be free to speak up, just like in an ideal speech community. The contributions of peace exchanges, conversations on a volatile world, to how we practice the social sciences in the School of Social Sciences are significant. There are three elements to how we practice the social sciences in the Ateneo School of Social Sciences. First is ensuring a sense of belonging as a way of ensuring the successful navigations of those who study and work in the university, a sense of belonging. Second is translocal and transnational engagements as a way for us to understand the Philippines better. And third, the problem-solving mode, so belonging and transnational and translocal engagements so that we may offer solutions. First, the peace exchanges will hopefully contribute to a sense of belonging for us by allowing us to see the link between the sense of belonging to the university and the country and the varied but interrelated issues of human security, international law, and food justice. Those are the topics for today. By spatially extending our sense of belonging to include Latin America, the peace exchanges also has contributions to our translocal engagements. In fact, the full subtitle of the peace exchanges is Conversations on a Volatile World, Perspectives from Latin America. The understanding of other localities, the understanding of Latin America is a way for us to understand the Philippines and our region better. Last year, the School of Social Sciences launched the Ricardo Leong Center, Institute for Global and Area Studies. And so far, we have, over the years, developed expertise in European, Korean, Japanese, and Southeast Asian studies. We certainly look forward to widening the scope of our area studies to include Latin America, South Asia, and the Middle East, for now. Finally, the peace exchanges contributes to the promotion of problem-solving mode in the social sciences. Knowledge for understanding is knowledge for action. In the School of Social Sciences, we remind our students, I'm so happy to have you here today, we are reminding you that it is not enough to critique, it's not even enough to analyze. As social scientists, we have to offer solutions, and to offer solutions is to solve a problem. I foresee that today's event and the two other conversation series will provide a comparative optics on common issues that beset our regions, and from such an understanding, there will be action, maybe not now, but in the future. So with our presenters from the University for Peace and interlocutors from the School of Social Sciences, and with your participation in the gallery, I hope that in the end of our peace exchanges today, our perspectives on Latin America, Southeast Asia, and the Philippines will be enriched by each other.
Thank you very much, Dean Bo Peep. The APS Peace Exchanges is a three-part series of conversations on peace and transdisciplinary social development to be held in the Philippines and Costa Rica between June and December of 2023. The global experience of the pandemic, along with other conflicts and challenges, have emphasized that we are living in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. The Ateneo de Manila University, through the School of Social Sciences, collaborated with the University for Peace to curate conversations on volatility, especially relating to peace and social development. These conversations are hoped to animate thinking and discourse on peace and development education, bridging the classroom to the field and various local, national, regional, and global orientations towards peace and development. The first installment of the APS Peace Exchanges features faculty members and administrators from the UN-mandated University for Peace in Costa Rica. Each presenter will be given between 15 to 20 minutes. After the three presentations, interlocutors will engage the presenters in conversation along with the rest of this space. Our first presenter is a rector of the University for Peace, Rector Francisco Rojas Aravena, will be sharing about human security. He will present the existing challenges to human security in Latin America, along with structural changes that allow new approaches to human security possible. May I call on Rector Rojas Aravena to the podium. Thank you.
And where, Clarissa, where okay. Thank you very much. It's a great honor to participate in this conversation. Thank you, Dean Sarina Sakamura, it's for the invitation. Thank you, Father Cruz, for being here. It's a great honor to stay here. I appreciate that, and I am very happy to see you with more energy than ever. And I think that is quite important for the Ateneo de Manila, because you will be an excellent professor in the next step. You are open a new era, and I think that is important. Thank you, Professor Areta, Reselis, and Joel, authorities of the Ateneo de Manila, Vice Rector of the University for Peace, Dr. Sáenz Borgo, and the Director of Environmental Program, Olivia Sylvester. Thank you all the APS students, and I'd like to thank especially to Clarissa and Maya for organizing different things, for being here, and they are part of the heart of the APS and will be quite important to support their work basically in create the network of the student of the APS. And I think that is quite important. The name of this conversation is quite special. We are in a volatile world. That is more poetic than the way we express how we see at the University for Peace the situation. We say we are in a new era of uncertainties and a new era of conflictivity. And we think this conflictivity will be maintained when we saw the next future. And we need to open a new opportunities for peace. We wrote a book in the University for Peace with the professor of the University for Peace 3 years ago. It's called The Difficult Task for Peace. And today, with the war in Europe, the conflict in different parts of the world, the task for peace is quite more difficult. The interest for peace, it's reduced. The interest for war is increasing basically in Europe. And we need to fight for that. And that is my main message, because when we saw the situation in Latin America and the situation in different parts of the world, it's complex, and we are in a moment where combine the nuclear threats and the climate change, Anthropoceno problems, and affect the possibility of the humanity. And we need to look at that and take actions of each of one to open this opportunity to peace. I try to move more quickly in the more structural view, and basically the international system moves from very quick, very quick from the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War has some moment of unipolarism, and we think it's for long time, but it was very short because appeared September 11 with the global terrorism, not only in the US, in Europe, in Moscow, in different parts of the world. The global terrorism transformed in a great problem. The economic crisis a few times create a financial problems in the world, and in some cases this crisis maintained today. The multipolar system appear, and today with the war it's not clear what will be the international system in the next future. It's clear we are confront international conflict, international conflicts in different parts, and new wars. And the atomic issue and environmental issue are crucial. And the atomic issue is not only for Russia and the issue in Ukraine. Near here, North Korea present an important threat because the launch from North Korea goes to Japan and other parts of this region. And the same as in the case of Russia, one mistake could be a global problem. The Secretary General of the United Nations said we're in a click of the disappear of the war. For that reason, we need to open new opportunities for peace. When we look at the situation today, the interstate war, it's a few. Has the invasion of Russia create a new problem, but basically is internal conflict as the main conflict in the war. And what is the heart of the human security? Free from fear, free from want to achieve, live in dignity. And that means people in the center, prevention-oriented, connect in a specific situation, and that means when we look like 30 years ago, when appeared human security in 1994 in the UNDP document, has basically 5 areas is necessary to look. Economic security, health security, environmental security, personal and community security, and political security. All are interconnected, but when we look in the history, Francisco de Vitoria, with the international law, tried to put this idea basically to protect the humanity. And one important thing in the debate is this, is complementary to the state security. Human security didn't go against the state security, are complementary. Again, it's necessary to look these things. International wars, economic and social difference and inequities, different social integration, health problem, institutional and political polarization, international security as a traditional vision, internal public citizen security, and environmental hazards. International security is basically a broad concept with various levels, goes through further than military component. International security is not only military component, it's transnational, multi-level, interdependent, and demands cooperation, trust, and partnership. And when we saw that, we have a great deficit. We don't have cooperation, trust, and partnership, and we need to increase that. And all of these in this moment are cumulative threats and interconnected. And it's necessary to look this difficult relation in the whole thing, the inequity, violent conflict, digital threats, health threat, and others. Today, in that area, basically, the artificial intelligence make a new threat, and we don't know how to move in that direction because has important advance in medicines, in how to take care of different things, but also has a dark part where the people like to take care and create a ship in the mine or take care of the essence of the person and change the basic biology, create different parts. Today, this circle, the dangerous in climate change, biodiversity, and others, create imbalance in the planet, affect the human security in different areas with social imbalance, and reproduce that. And that means it's necessary thinking the relationship between climate change, the security of the planet, and human security. And today means all these things in the air, in the land, in the sea, in the pollution, in the urban, create destruction and affect the life of the humanity. Again, here is the non-state conflict, the state conflict, and this is increasingly the index of the development of different countries, the development for the people, but it's increased this kind of internal war, polarization, populism, and affect the democracy. Also, the new conflict has one specific consequence, linkage with the mobility of the persons, migrations, and move a lot of people from different activities, disasters, wars, violence, and other. And today, Europe is trying to close their borders, and the same the US, or in Latin America also refer the internal migration in our countries. When the debate during these like 30 years refer the concept is thinking all or nothing. And that means it's important because tend to be thinking in human security the possibility to militarize this concept. The government maintained the traditional concept of security. That means linkage with the use of violence. And when we think this refer to the ecology as bioterrorism. And when we think in culture, we could say the interreligious conflict support the terrorism. In all areas, it's possible to see the traditional use of force, but it's necessary to look the whole view in that. That means we need to look the transnational organized crime, how to affect today as a main part of the problem of human security. Children in war is not only theme of the past in Africa. Today, childs kill other childs in Latin America, but in another part. In some moment, you leave these things here in this country. In Latin America, has a structural problem. Latin America has reached consensus around the common conceptual framework in security, but didn't operationalize. We don't have clear institutional for that. The main advance was the Declaration of Security of the Americas in 2003. And I had personally the opportunity to stay in Mexico, and I spoke in the name of the civil society in that meeting. And what say in that declaration? Basically, the main threat are terrorism, transnational organized crime, the drugs problem, but also extremely poverty and social exclusion in largest sector of population, and also affect the stability of the democracy. That appear as the two main problems. The other are refer human trafficking, cybersecurity, natural disaster, and other refer to an accident in that. Today, when we look at the main threat for Latin America, in the top today appear organized crime and increase the cyber attacks. That means we look that affect all the democracies, the complex of the governance. And when we see Latin America is the most violent region in the world, in the survey referred to the 50 more dangerous cities in the world, has in different parts, but if you saw in red are Mexico, in green Brazil, and others. That means in the last year in Mexico referred 17 cities are the most dangerous cities in the world. In Honduras too, Haiti is the capital city, and in Ecuador one. And that means increase the homicides. Here refer to the homicides for Latin America and Central America. In Central America, this is 18.4, and in the case of Latin America, is 16.4. This is the countries of Central America. This country is El Salvador. And El Salvador has fight against the Maras and win the fight probably without any gun, any bullets, but also lose the democracy. The problem is how to combine the fight against the organized crime, the pandillas, and maintain the democracy. That is the main thing. Today, the country with more problem referred to Honduras, and when we saw last week or 2 weeks ago the killing of 46 women in the jail. And that means here the country who make Belize go down, El Salvador go down, Honduras go down, but with a high level, an increase in Dominican Republic, and increase also in Costa Rica. In Costa Rica, increase a lot. And that is related with the rule of law. The rule of law is crucial in Costa Rica, is the most important state in Central America with the respect of rule of law, but in the other countries has great problems in that. Latin America in Latin America in general, the security took the agenda. And today, the main problem in the majority of the countries is security. And the perception of insecurity is very high in all countries of the region. One important thing is this: in all states are failure spaces where don't has the rule of law, don't has the police, don't has other, but don't has also the church, don't has also the health, don't has also the education. And for that reason, it's necessary to increase the national territorial control, the monopoly of the use of force, for put all the capability of the state for resolve these things. We need to look the human development, and the human development create the climate change problem in the biodiversity, consumption, and development. In the University for Peace, we are chair some United Nations action referred to SDG 12. And we saw the problem referred to this SDG and the impact in the human development. If we maintain the same human development today, it's impossible for the planet to maintain the life of the planet. And we need to think in how to relate human development, human rights, and human security, and we need to rethink in international security, human security, and state security in the era of the atomic threat and others. Three main problems refer to affect the human security in the whole Latin America, but particularly in Central America. The poverty and the extremely poverty. And if we look that last year is the same of two years ago, but it's more or less the same as 10 years ago. Don't have any progress during these 10 years. For that reason, say, we lose a decade of development. And when we look the projection of the growth of the region is very, very low. For that reason, the satisfaction with the democracy of the people is very, very high, the insatisfaction. Only the 25% of the people feel democracy give answer for their life. For that reason, we need to rethink in how to defend the planet, the biodiversity, and we need a new conceptual map. In that, the role of the woman will be central, and it's necessary to develop that. For that reason, we are very, very happy with the role of the APS. In the APS, the majority of the students was women, and a lot of them has important role today working in United Nations, in NGOs, or as a teacher in the schools and in another part. We need to rethink in how to incorporate new technologies, use the artificial intelligence for peace. Because today, the peace are devalued in Europe, in different parts, as the same of the democracy. Human security, the basics of human security is to support by the democracy as the best system for that. Thank you very much, and thank you, Isa, for the 3 minutes late. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rector Rojas. The next speaker is Vice Rector Juan Carlos Sainz Borgo. His presentation will focus on international law from the Latin American and Central American perspectives. Vice Rector Sainz Borgo.
Okay, no, I have the time here, so good. So good afternoon. Thank you very much to everyone here in Ateneo. Thank you very much, Dean. I joined Rector Rojas welcoming Father Cruz. It's great to see you here, Father. It's very important for all of us, so welcome. It has been extremely difficult to prepare this presentation. I've been thinking about, I've talked with Maya back and forth, but what I need to say is really, really complicated for me how we present this idea. So I will start to put some basic elements about how I see international law in Latin America. But first of all, we need to talk about what is Latin America. Perhaps it's one of the most complicated concepts because in general in Latin America, we don't know what Latin America means. If you see from the point of view of the US, they talk about Hispanic America. By Hispanic America, it's not this. So the geographical terms are more or less safe, South America, but where South America starts. I mean, so it's a very difficult explanation. So when we refer to Latin America, it's something, a political concept that goes from Mexico to the end of the continent, so at the end in Argentina and Chile, but does not include the Caribbean. In general, the English-speaking Caribbean, because we have a Spanish-speaking Caribbean. So the Spanish-speaking Caribbean will be part of Latin America, but not the English-speaking Caribbean. So super easy, no problem about it. So I think it is important to understand how we see Latin America as a concept that is a political concept that has a lot of relation with history, how the whole Spanish crown conquered the region and how we evolve in that sense. So in that regards, I see Latin America extremely close with international law from the very, very, very beginning. This painting here is a representation of Pope Alexander VI, made by the famous artist Tiziano. And it's one of his official portraits. And you can see the Pope there with the Spanish helmet here, down here, and the Spanish ships all around. Because basically, why I'm starting with the Pope? Because the Pope Alexander VI, that is the Borgia Pope, when it was a Spanish Pope, and serves to divide the territories between Portugal and Spain. So basically, the whole conquer and the establishment of what we believe today is Latin America emerged after a decision of a head of the state, like the Pope. They said, look, one part is going to be for the Portuguese crown and the other part is going to be for the Spanish crown. Actually, when we see the first map of the region that was made by Juan de la Cosa in 1500, they start to divide what are going to be the part for the Spaniards and what are going to be the part for the Portuguese. And then in this map of the area, you see that they were trying to move the border. But what I'm trying to show is from the very beginning, the whole region has been governed by very clear international law perspective. So that marks a lot the way that the whole continent evolved. From the very beginning, all the discussions and the elements have been framed on what is international law in different times of the evolution. For example, during the whole Spanish colonial rule, we were governed by what the Spanish crown believed there was international law at that time, dividing the regions and with important debates. For example, the Indian population were humans or not. Do they have human rights or not? There was the debates in Europe at that time and really marks the whole Spanish rule during 400 years. Then we have the independence war that started more or less in 1810, and the biggest battles of the independence ends around 1826, that there was in Boyacá, in what is currently Colombia, Ayacucho in Peru, Carabobo in Venezuela, Callao in Peru, that ends the Spanish ruling in the continent. But immediately at that time, the new countries, especially under the guidance of Simón Bolívar, they called for a Congress to organize the relation among all the states. So immediately after the war, we need to organize what are going to be our relations. And in this first Congress that is called the Congress of Panama, that actually is in that particular construction that you see there, because today is called like Palacio Bolívar in Panama City, they agree in 2 or 3 key elements. One is a peaceful settlement of disputes. We need to talk. And the second one is that in Latin America we will keep the same borders as the Spanish Crown divide, and it's a principle that comes from Latin America as the uti possidetis juris. We will keep the same borders of our colonial rulers, that actually was adopted later on by Africa because it was a way to stabilize the whole region, and the importance of trade treaties. So in that regards, in general, in Latin America, it's an area that have no interstate conflicts, that we have no war of conquer of the other. I will take some exceptions, very limited in territorial terms. It's a very peaceful region in the relation between states. However, this element of, they need to cooperate from the international point of view maintains from the very beginning, because this spirit of what we call the Congress of Panama started to move in the relation between the states of Latin America in the relations with the United States. And it started in the 19th century what we call the Inter-American Conferences. There were a series of conferences between all the countries in the Americas, means the United States and the whole continent, to manage the key elements of the relation. That was what was designed or later on known as the Organization of American States. The Organization of American States considered the oldest international organization in the world. Why is considered the oldest? Because it takes from the 19th century with these permanent and periodical conferences, and that's why it's considered the oldest conference, the oldest organization in the world. Actually, this building that you can find next to, in front actually, of the White House in Washington was a gift of the United States to the relation with the region. However, it's a super complicated organization. It's an organization that is not well respected in the region. I said that it's an organization that had bad luck. It's, people have good luck, some people have bad luck. And the OAS has a bad luck. And I think one moment is one time that the former commander of the guerrillas in Cuba, the Che Guevara, went to there and then defined the organization and the Ministry of Colonies of the United States, like the Commonwealth of the Brits. And this is one way that, it's one organization that never take off in the respect for many people in the region, but it's key on the way that we interact in the continent. And is the base of all the key institutional elements that guide the relations among all the states. For example, within the Organization of American States, it was approved the Inter-American Declaration of Human Rights. It was approved in 1948 in April. And when you think about the Universal Declaration of the United Nations, was approved at the end of that year. So the Regional Declaration of Human Rights is, it was approved before that the Universal one. Just to give an example of how advanced was the organization in terms of the protection of the human rights in the region. Within the organization in 1959, it was created the first Inter-American Commission for Human Rights as a body for the international protection of human rights. So more or less at the same time that the European Court of Human Rights was created. So they give you an example how important it is from the point of view of the whole continent that to have a framework to protect the human rights, and even in the 1979 was the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, that is the only court in the region to protect the human rights, was approved in 1979. So that gives us how important is international law for the region and how historically developed has been the topic in the region. However, you asked me to talk a little bit more about Central America. Where is Central America? Another complication. Okay? Central America, if you ask, I learned a lot what Central American is when living in Costa Rica. For some people, Costa Rica is not in Central America, it's in something called Mesoamerica, that is something more complicated than Central America, so we will not go in that details. So Central America is a region that starts at the end of Mexico, south of Mexico, until Panama. They also share a super interesting history. As we said, they was governed by the rest of the continent by the Spanish crown, and it was governed by only one captaincy. There was the captaincy of Guatemala, and that kept that idea of unified government for at least 20 years, because between 1821 to 1824, there was under one new country called the Confederation of Central American Countries, and then after 24 until 49, they create a Central American Federal Republic. You know, the idea of these small countries emerged, and then they decided, and they live as an independent state. Then later on to the concept of Central America is Panama. Panama used to be part of Colombia until 1903, after a process of separation motivated by the construction of the Panama Canal. They separate from Colombia, and is what we consider today the region of Central America. This heritage of common governance from the international point of view was very, very important for the region. Actually, in 1907, they create a group of treaties that established sort kind of supranational government among all these group of states. And actually, they established the first permanent international court of the world. It was called the Central American Court of Justice. That served in this particular building, that it was today the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Costa Rica, that actually the building was donated by the Carnegie Foundation. There was the same foundation that creates the construction of the International Court of Justice in The Hague. So there was that idea that, you know, it was so pioneering the work that we're doing on this international court that they support the creation of a full court. However, in 1918, the political will was lost. They started, you know, the small fights against the countries, and then the whole idea of the court collapsed. We don't know important. When you ask the country what happened, was just, you know, technicalities, bad luck again on the way of the communications that erased that important example of the whole history of international law. Again, going back to the idea to create organizations to handle the relation among the states. In 1951, they create the Association of Central American States. It was a sort kind of the European Union for the Central America at that time that was extremely advanced with integration, with cooperation in many topics that with the eruption of the Cold War collapsed. I will go in detail to what the Cold War happens in the region. And then they re-emerge in 1991, what they call it the Central American System of Integration, now incorporating other countries that were not before. First of all, Belize. The Belize was the English or the British colonial settled in Honduras, north of Honduras, that was conquered in the 19th century, and the Dominican Republic, that is the Spanish-speaking island in the Caribbean. And today, we'll refer that later on, create a free trade area with the United States. Central America was a very difficult scenario of the Cold War during the 80s. It was a very, very bloody, it was a whole confrontation between the US and the Soviet Union at that time with guerrilla, very terrible instability, you know, almost 1 million of displacement, very, very dramatic. However, what I want to point out is, even though there was a confrontation between the US and the Soviet Union with many foreign interests in it, the Central American countries creates a space within the international law to sign a group of agreement. There was the Esquipulas agreement that put the whole process of peace at the region under the international level. And they approved this group of treaties that creates international cooperation, supervision, control of the armed forces, and asked the United Nations to monitor all this development. As a example of how important this Esquipulas agreement was, that the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the president of Costa Rica in representation of the whole effort of the region into that side. One of the problems that we will go, and the rector mentioned a lot, that group of agreements ends the war, but it didn't bring peace. And it's one of the contradictions in the region. We have a formal peace, but we don't have sustainable peace into the population. So concluding, today we can say that Central America is a region where the fundamental human rights are monitored from the international point of view. It's an international economic unit, very clear, that works. All these countries belong to one economic unit with a free trade area with the United States that actually works. They have, enterprise that move from each other. They have borders among them. Have important internal security problems, as Rector Rojas mentioned before. Drug-related issues, gang violence are the most important element. And right now, the element of migration, the trafficking of human beings, is perhaps the most important one. And the region is working together with the complexities that we have today with some of the local government, like the case of Nicaragua, and also with the support of the United Nations and some type of support of the government of the United States. When I say some type of support, it's because they assigned Mexico certain role in this new policy, but it's something that we can say that is under the framework of international law. To conclude, international frameworks support local agendas in Central America and have been extremely important in the process of democratization, in general human rights, and bringing new topics into the agenda, like, for example, indigenous rights. The international law has been a level of absolute support for the integration process of the region, helping and to improving the level of life of the people, because clearly create bigger markets for countries that are so small. However, the international frameworks require political support to achieve the objectives. One of the problems today is that the consensus of what to do in the region is broken. I think Rector Rojas makes it very clear when the satisfaction of the population in Latin America against democracy shows you something. The consensus about what we want to do in the societies is reflecting in the relation among the states. And if we don't have the political will, if we don't have the political support of the agreements, international law is just a piece of paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Rector Juan Carlos. Our last speaker for today is Dr. Olivia Sylvester. Dr. Sylvester is the head of the Environment and Development Department of the University for Peace. Today, she will provide an overview of food justice in the context of Latin America, as well as share current University for Peace research on this field of study.
Good afternoon, evening to everyone. Thank you to everyone present today, Father Cruz, who I met today, faculty, Ateneo faculty, from UPeace, Rector Rojas, Vice Rector Juan Carlos, to all of the students here today. It's so wonderful to see you coming out to this event, and especially the APS students who I've been at UPeace now for 8 years, and I've had a chance to work with UP students for 8 years and heard so many great things about Ateneo de Manila. So I'm just so happy to be here today. Can you hear me all right? The back? Okay, perfect. Wonderful. So I'm originally from Canada and moved to Costa Rica 16 years ago to study, and I've been at UPeace for 8 years, and the topic of food justice and actually food sovereignty is really one of my passions. So today I'm going to give you an overview in Latin America. I'm going to link to a few of the things that Rector and the Vice Rector shared with you today, but I do want to make it clear that this is an issue that's not just in Latin America, food justice. I'm really inviting you to make the links to your context here today. And just to start, so you know, last year and the 3 years before that, over almost 900 million people were hungry in the world. So this is globally. And the United Nations organization, the Food and Agricultural Organization, or FAO, has made a public report, they make one every year, stating that we are actually doing worse than we were doing in 2014 to support food security or people's access to nutritious food or sufficient calories. And they've said openly that we need to change the way we're thinking about the land and producing our food. So I'm going to go over a little bit about that today, bring you some topics from Latin America, and invite you to make those links to where you are coming from. So just to start with the definition, basically, I'm going to talk about food justice, and it has a lot of similarities to food sovereignty. As I say here, it's talking about communities exercising their rights to grow and sell culturally appropriate and nutritious food. It also talks about the injustices, class injustices, race injustices around access to food. And I'm linking the two terms today. There are slight differences, but they both talk about the right to healthier and nutritious food that's culturally appropriate. And food sovereignty also talks about the movement that people have a say in where their food comes from and how it's produced. And also gives power back to the people and moves it away from big corporations and markets that are currently controlling much of our food system. So just like my colleagues did, zoning in a little bit in Latin America, just to see kind of the origins of some of the foods that come from Latin America. Here you can see maize, potato, sweet potato, cassava, cacao, all of these wonderful foods that come from this region. I'm starting with this because it's such an important piece, this historical piece of all of these foods and knowledges that have produced these foods in the region, and then go to some of the challenges we're having today. So just to give an example, maize is the second most cultivated crop in the world, and Latin America is the center of diversity of maize. As you can see, it feeds a large portion of the world's population. There's a beautiful picture here from Peru of this diversity of 3,000 varieties of potatoes that you can find in Peru, and compared to those few conventional varieties that we see at the supermarkets, they can be up to 4 times as rich in iron and other nutrients. And in fact, a study done in Peru found that each crop or traditional crop grown by smallholders increases the chance of a diverse diet, specifically of women, by 17%. And globally, you may have heard some things, a lot of news goes towards climate change and talks about how these traditional crops in Latin America and across the world are really important for adapting to climate change. They're adapted to areas, they might be adapted to droughts, and those traditional crops can't be harnessed without respecting the traditional knowledge and understanding the traditional knowledge of people that are growing them. It's not the same to have seeds in a seed bank as it is to have preservation of that food in situ. Just so you know as well, a lot of these traditional crops that I'm showing you here are part and parcel of indigenous knowledge in the region, globally and in Latin America. And in Latin America, we have more than 800 indigenous peoples. And that's 10% of the total population in Latin America and the Caribbean. And then this graph is really, really important because as you can see, if you look kind of on, on your left, you can see that globally, indigenous people are around less than 10% of the population, but on your far right, you can see that high level of green, that they're protecting more than 80% of the world's biodiversity, including the food diversity. So this is just to say that we have a huge diversity of traditional crops, crops important for our climate crisis, our climate collapse. We have a huge indigenous population protecting that, or as we can look in Latin America, around 10%, a big proportion. But compared to the global population, it's really small. And interestingly, they're protecting a large percent of that diversity. So that all sounds great, but unfortunately there are a lot of threats to this. One that I mentioned is we're suffering food insecurity worldwide, and we're suffering food insecurity in Latin America. So I'm going to talk to you about some of those threats in the region. First, this is a global statistic. more than 70% of the global crop species that we have either been lost or put into seed banks or seed reserves. So all of those beautiful maize varieties that I showed you and all of those beautiful potato varieties, unfortunately a lot of it is lost. And this is a picture of all the different a few diversity crops of cacao. In Latin America, we're in fact the world's largest net food exporting region. But this is a big contrast. 4 in 10 people in Latin America live in moderate to severe food insecurity versus a global statistic of 1 in 10 worldwide. So just think about that for a minute. It doesn't really make sense that a region that's producing so much food for the world is suffering a disproportionate amount of food insecurity. A region with so many indigenous crops, the maize, the potatoes, the cacao, has a large proportion of the population suffering food insecurity. So I want to ask the question, why do we have these high levels of agrobiodiversity loss and food insecurity in the region and in fact globally as well? I'm going to talk about 3 reasons because this is a really short kind of overview, but there are many more. I'm going to talk about 3 key regions that we're noticing in Latin America. And the first is foreign investments in land and specifically agriculture, a phenomenon that we call land grabbing. The picture on the top, you can see all of the beautiful geographic lines are monocultures of pineapple in Costa Rica. Currently, Costa Rica is the biggest exporter of pineapple in the world, and you can see kind of the wavy areas that are kind of the lighter green that looks like forest. That's riparian area around nationally protected wetlands. And unfortunately, all of this monoculture pineapple is encroaching into the wetlands and contaminating the water sources, which are also community water sources. So we've got big transnational companies, what we call land grabbing, or buying up a lot of that land and then converting it into these industrial monocultures. The picture on the bottom, unfortunately, was all forest area in Oaxaca, Mexico, which is now monoculture completely of sugarcane fields. So just a couple of news stories, just so it's not just me saying it. Corporations grabbing land and water overseas, fears for the world's poor countries as the rich grab land to grow food. And so just a definition of this, what is land grabbing? So basically, not what is land grabbing, but how is it happening? And unfortunately, land grabbing is being posited as a way to produce food for the world, but in fact, as these authors say, big corporations and joint investors are investing enormous amounts of money in land and food production and the export and import of commodities and food market speculation. So it's not necessarily the main goal to be producing food. We are producing food, but at what cost? And this quote says, the new land grabbers want to enclose more of the commons. They want to dismantle our relationships and connections. They no longer need to invade. They can make commercial deals. They no longer have to carry the burden of maintaining slaves. They can rely on a ready supply of low-wage labor. And this really speaks to what Rector Rojas showed us about extreme poverty and poverty in Latin America. When we have forced poverty due to structural issues, and we have companies that are offering people lower than living wages, this is what's happening, right? So land grabbing is one key issue that we're seeing in terms of food justice. And this graph shows you the percentage of total land area grabbed or taken by large corporations in private hands in Latin America. And you can see the countries that are buying up the land. We've got a large percentage is US. You can see Canada there, where I'm from, China. But you can also see other Latin American countries buying up land in other regions. So there's Brazil, Argentina, Chile, for instance. And digging a little deeper into what happens, not only do we see these industrial monocultures, and this is news in Spanish here, but you see that picture again. And in the graph, you can see Costa Rica, as my colleague showed the map previously, Vice Rector Juan Carlos. You can see Costa Rica there with darker brown areas. Those are all the patches of highly intensely produced pineapple. And unfortunately, in the south, where you can see kind of right on your right, I guess, in the south, that overlaps with traditional indigenous territories. So we have areas of land, and you can see from this notice in Costa Rica, for instance, indigenous territories are protesting against transnationals for the buying up and the using of that land in ways that are not healthy for the land or people. And that takes me to my second point, is that one of the key areas in the world in food justice is industrial agriculture, i.e. the way we produce our food in an industrial way, and the use of toxic chemical pesticides. So this is a UNDP report from Costa Rica last year, 2022, that says Costa Rica uses 8 times more pesticides than many other countries, including US, Sweden, Canada, etc. It uses 20 of the 22 most toxic pesticides in the whole world. And this is 4 news items from Costa Rica. One is being investigated right now in the area of Cartago, Costa Rica. It says water is sacred too, how a pesticide banned in Europe because it's proven by the WHO to cause cancer and developmental issues is being produced in Europe, Canada, other countries, and being sold to Costa Rica, and since 2018 contaminated drinking water source. And so that just was researched in this last year, 2022. Then you see where it says escuelas, so basically there's a picture of schools around pineapple fields. The fumigation or spraying of toxic chemical pesticides in industrial agriculture affects surrounding communities. This is news from 2023, where schools had to be evacuated because pesticides were getting into the schools. And you can see other news items or a peer-reviewed study there where pesticides are causing problems in watersheds, causing fish to have cancer, death, etc. An issue with this industrial monoculture, that we don't only see in Latin America, but we see in the world, is that it takes away the space where we can be growing all of those diverse foods, the diverse maize, the diverse potatoes that are high in iron. These spaces where people can be growing this diversity. And this is just a picture where it says small farmers in Mexico keep corn's genetic diversity alive, right? That's very different from a sea of pineapples or sugarcane. And the third point that I want to make around food justice is one of the challenges with keeping alive these diverse food sources that are not only important for human and land health, but for cultural diversity, is we have extreme violence towards indigenous and local land defenders. This is true globally. The Global Witness report on the top, where it says Decade of Defiance, reported for a decade the assassinations of land defenders. And below it is a a poster from Costa Rica. It says Justice for Sergio and Jerry, who were assassinated in Costa Rica in the last 3 years, and they were land defenders of indigenous territories. And so from the Global Witness report, you can see what's happening in Latin America. Rector Rojas also mentioned, and Vice Rector Juan Carlos, violence in the region. And you can see by country, from 2012 to 2021, we have almost 2,000 land and environmental defenders killed worldwide, and many of these countries are in Latin America: Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Honduras. And so I just wanted to end that part with a quote, and it says, "We cannot save the world's biological diversity unless we also nurture the human diversity that protects and develops it." And I also ask that question: what are the values and ethics within which we want to use the land? What are the values and ethics within which we guide our food production, right? And one thing is industrial monoculture with all of those issues. One thing is land grabbing. One thing is with violence towards people and violence towards nature. And another is what I showed you at the beginning: diversity of crops, diversity of people, respect for cultures, and food sovereignty and food justice. So ending, in Latin America, we also have, as we do worldwide, really strong movements for food sovereignty and food justice. There's a global movement, which is really strong in Latin America, called La Via Campesina, where farmers and peasants have local initiatives, grassroots initiatives, all the way up to the UN, that are fighting daily for support for biodiversity, support for people's lives, support for the land, support for food security, and that's been a really strong movement in Latin America. We also have another movement, you may have heard of it, it's becoming more popular globally, which is called agroecology. Agroecology is ecological agriculture, and it really supports all of the traditional ways of using those diverse crops, caring about the land, caring about people. I have a picture on my left, probably your right, says Cuba could be the world's reference for global agroecology. They have a really strong movement for urban agriculture and sustainable farming. Argentina has a proposed law on agroecology so that we can have better ways of producing our food and legal support for that fact. And in Costa Rica, I just wanted to show this green area of this map is one of our biggest protected areas, and it's surrounding that protected area, we have multiple indigenous communities, and this is one of our APS students here, Gabby, who's not here today, working with a Bribri indigenous leader on campus at UPeace, planting traditional foods. So at the small scale level of UPeace out towards wider indigenous territories in Costa Rica, day to day, I call it an act of resistance. Every time someone's planting a traditional food, it's an act of resistance against these corporate industrial production systems that are literally killing people, and as I showed you earlier. Some of the research we do at UPeace, this is one example of what I call agroecology, or what is called agroecology. This was a study that was done a few years ago with a colleague of mine and myself. We looked at 12 Bribri farms, very small scale farms, and on those farms we found over 45 species in only 12 farms of edible foods and animals, etc. And women, in fact, are one of the biggest promoters in Latin America of agroecology. Women's participation is key for seed saving, for family nutrition. However, as this article, the title shows, women are still having to deal with issues in the field of agriculture and other fields in terms of wider support for their participation. So ending there, I just wanted to kind of zone in a little bit on what we're doing towards food sovereignty and food justice at UPeace. Here are some pictures of the campus. Below you'll see a picture with indigenous leaders talking about their cultures and traditions in a territory close to UPeace. Our Professor Yan working on growing trees. We do things from indigenous food sovereignty. We work with environment conflicts, land defense, and more. And here are some pictures at the end of also some of our projects, and thank you very much for this space today.
Thank you very much to our three speakers, Rector Rojas, Vice Rector Sainz Borgo, and Dr. Sylvester. We are joined by esteemed academics and friends, Professor Mary Rosales, Dr. Joel Canuday, and Dr. Apple Oreta. They will further the engagement with the material we have presented by asking the presenters some questions. Maybe let's not make it very formal. It's not a Q&A session, but I think an invitation to converse, since contexts are both very different, but at the same time, very much the same. So may I just take a little bit of time to introduce our interlocutors. Professor Mary Rosales is a Filipino social scientist and development worker. She's among the founders of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and currently a research scientist at the Institute of Philippine Culture, which she also co-founded. Her research and community engagements are in the area of poverty, urbanization, civil society, and community development. Dr. Joel Canuday is the chair of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and he specializes in visual and material anthropology, anthropology of conflict and displacement, rooted cosmopolitanism, and interreligious relations. And finally, Dr. Oreta is the director of the Ricardo Leong Institute for Global and Area Studies. She's involved in research projects covering the issues of terrorism and extremism, peace building and community security management, and security sector governance and reform. So I think we're going the opposite, in the opposite order, with Dr. Oreta Apple going first, and then followed by Joel, and then Mary. And of course, to our conversation starters, as this whole table is, maybe if you can respond to any of the points you feel strongly about. So, Apple?
Hello. Is it working? Okay, thank you. And thank you very much. The presentation, the three presentations actually were very, very interesting. But I will focus my discussion with the presentation of Rector Aravena. These are really not questions, but actually reflections. And as you can see, I have a lot of notes while listening to Rector. When you were discussing first about the human security, the basic, the idea that came to my mind really is that there's a lot of similarity with Latin America and Asia, particularly the Philippines. We were both colonized by Spain, so we have a lot of similarity in terms of our culture. But in terms of our conflict, we also have a lot of similarity, both of at least the region of Latin America and Southeast Asia in particular, had low intensity conflict during the 70s. So we are very familiar, no, with these kinds of conflict, and hence the discussion about human security is a welcome issue among countries in Southeast Asia. No? Human security, in fact, has a long history, and to a large extent, I would say, and I would like to give credit to a lot of the community or grassroots organization that really pushed for the discussion or broadening the debate on security from the traditional or the state-centered security to a broader human security. So it entered the discursive space of the international community, hence. But I would like to give credit to Japan that really started the push or the advocacy on the concept of comprehensive security as early as the 1990s. No? But the international or the global community eventually caught on, and hence in 2012 we had the human security resolution. So it was really a welcome innovation, especially for countries that are experiencing conflict. No? However, and this is now where I present the issues, no? The Ukraine and Russia conflict, no? And I fully agree that a lot of conflicts right now are intrastate, no? And after the Cold War, or after the Second World War, most of the conflicts are really intrastate. But now with the US-Russia conflict, I would say the state is back, no? The debate about, or the effort of the global south, no, in expanding the discussion on human security is, I believe, is being threatened again because of the very state-centered discussion now because of what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. So it is moving the discourse now to a very state-centered concept, or the traditional concept of security. And as mentioned by Rector earlier, there are now discussions about Europe closing their borders because of the internal migration. But because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, again, the national sovereignty discourse might actually be again further strengthened. And this development is actually being used, the current volatility, no, is actually being used by other players to gain power and influence. For example, China, no, is strengthening its clout further in Southeast Asia, but no, not only in Southeast Asia, but in Asia in general, no, presenting itself as a responsible partner and presenting itself, or presenting the idea that we should reject the old global order or the US-led global order. But the question is, whose order are we now going to, what kind of order are we now going to create? Japan is also pushing to increase its defense budget, no? From now it's, I think, 1% of the GDP, but it's pushing to increase it to 2%. So what are the possible implications of that, at least in the region, in the Southeast Asian region? The next point that I wanted to mention would be like what Rector has mentioned earlier, that the satisfaction to democracy is being questioned. No? It's not only in Latin America. We are witnessing that, and I guess the greatest manifestation would be the emergence of populist leaders. No? We had that, no, in the Philippines. No? Turkey also had that. What's the country beside Germany? Austria also. So you have, we have witnessed the emergence of populist leaders. But again, and I would like to connect this with the war again in Ukraine, no? The might makes right principle versus the rule of law principle. Small countries like us are capitalizing on the rule of law principle in international relation. But big countries like Russia and the United States, no, are always using the might makes right principle. No? And the problem is that the US doesn't have, US and EU to a large extent, they don't have the moral high ground, no, to assert the rule of law, because they also did what Russia has done, no, with a different agenda. No, the Afghanistan and Iraq come to mind when we talk about the U.S. No, of course the agenda is different, but the fundamental strategy is the same. No, they are using their strength in order to assert what they think, no, is right. No, so in other words, the point here is that are we now witnessing a return also of democracy versus autocracy? No, the democracy representing this quote unquote rule of law, and the might makes right, no, representing the autocracy. No? So it is not only, so on the state level, we are witnessing people challenging or questioning democracy, but in the international level, it seems that there's also a lot of debate that's happening. So as mentioned by Rector earlier, a new conceptual map, no, on international order might really be necessary. And I think UP's graduates are in the best position because they are fielded, no, in a lot of the UN agencies. No? So it is really an opportunity, a very good opportunity to rethink the UN as well as its agency, as well as its agencies. But the question is, will the military and economic powerful states allow it, no? And do we have, and when I say we, I refer to us being in the global south, no? Or the smaller states that really do not have the political, economic, and military power in the global arena. Do we have the clout to challenge this global order? Do I still have time? I know I'm okay, very, very quickly, no? And then the next point is that, again, because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, no, and connected with the state being back, no, the nuclear arms debate is also back, no, because President Biden of the U.S. declared that he's not going to go to war because of Ukraine, and the context of that statement is that because Russia is a nuclear power, no. So it has an implication again to countries like North Korea and Pakistan. I call them the nuclear wannabes, no? And I don't know if in Latin America there are also nuclear power or countries that are similar to North Korea and Pakistan who really want to join the nuclear arms race, no? Finally, we are witnessing an international conflict in a volatile environment, but we are also witnessing this conflict in an environment where there's so much advancement in technology. We are witnessing drones. We are witnessing long-range missiles. We are witnessing technology-controlled weapons. No? Our international protocols, the Geneva Conventions, are all focused on conventional warfare. But with this development in the technology, is the international community also ready? Do we have the appropriate understanding of all these technological weapons for us to be able to forge an international protocol that will guide, no, or that will supervise, no, the utilization of these weapons? So I will stop there, and I don't know if it will be Rector or I will pass on to Madam.
Do you have any quick responses or comments before we move on? I'd like to respond.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oreta. I think during this 30 years of human security, the main focus is how to move from the state center to the people center, how to put the people in the center. And the second one, I think today with more force than the past, is try to hear the Beatles. Because the Beatles say, give a chance for peace. But today, when we look at the situation in Europe, they don't like to give the chance for peace. they like to improve the arm race. And this is it's like the pandemic, because all the states increase their military expenditure, with the exception of, in the case of Latin America, reduced in the case of Mexico and Brazil. But in all parts of the world, as you say, Japan and also German, who has a high level of GDP, 1 point of increase the military expenditure is a lot of money, and this money didn't come to cooperation, didn't come to use in prevent new pandemic, didn't come to create a space for resolve the climate change. The basic problem is one of the G5, Russia, broke the rules. And today, we don't have clear system of the rules. And as you said, the rules is essential for smallest countries. And all the explanation gave by the vice rector referred to international law in the case of Latin America is thinking how international law is the main tool for prevent action for the superpowers. He goes very quick through the Doctrina Drago, but probably he needs to explain a little bit about that, or other international thoughts where sources in Latin America is important to think in the global system of norms. We don't know where will be, when finished in some moment, the war in Ukraine. When will be, we don't know. Could be and great problems, but will be a quite different international system, because has the nuclear power appear as an important tool for different countries. In the case of Korea, it's clearly in the case of Iran and others, and it's important to see that. And in the university, we say from the last 5 years at least, we need a new conceptual map, a new conceptual cartography to understand the changes. For the case of Latin America, cooperation and integration as a part of the ideal to move in that, and Latin America defined as a peace zone, but we have, in the other hand, a highly violence in the region. But we are a peace zone in an interstate relation, and also Latin America has a very good example, and it's necessary to look as a free denuclearization zone. Also, again, with the internationalization, we have the Tlatelolco Agreement referred to that, and one international organization, OPANAL, to see and control that. All the efforts today to stop the war in Ukraine don't have a result. The mediation of the Pope don't has advanced. The mediation of the Turkish didn't advance. Some ideas appear from Italy, disappear. The Chinese move with another time in that, and we don't know what kind of result is possibly to that. And in the Global South has support at least 30 or 35 countries to Russia. In the case of Latin America, at least 3 countries support Russia. Others don't like to take any position, like El Salvador, or Mexico and Brazil move with some doubt to didn't support, but look in different way. And don't has movement because the efforts of Brazil with Lula try to organize and G20 for peace didn't go. And I think the civil society, the global civil society is quiet because the armed race today has more importance in Europe, where has important movement for disarmament. In other part, didn't appear initiative to move in that way. For that reason, I think we are, as I start, we are a new era with highly uncertainties, a new era of confrontation, and we need to reinforce the activity of the APS graduates to work for peace. Thank you.
I actually have several. Okay, there it goes. I actually have several questions and some thoughts for the three of you, and I don't even know where to start, but probably I'll engage Dr. Sylvester, at least for this point, and I promise to keep it short, aware of the time that's ticking. I'll probably approach this from as you invited the invitation. Where can we link the Latin American experience to the experience that we have? As you were talking, giving the presentation, it occurred to me that the very heart of the agrarian conflict, the history of conflict, in fact, insurgency, armor pricing in this country, from its post-colonial position all the way to now, and the conflict in the south, Mindanao, if you're familiar, conflict up in the north, are all agrarian in nature, and they had some bearing on land expansions, land grabbing from corporate to local landowners expanding. And in recent years, I think in Mindanao, which is I think also similar to experiences in Indonesia and to some extent Malaysia, except that in the Mindanao area, it gets a little bit more complicated because of the investments that were poured in for industrial crops, particularly pineapple, and also what you call this, the oil palm, and banana, and there's an interesting progress in the banana trajectory, because the banana cropping is mainly and has been mainly established for the Japanese market and in some other markets in Europe, but largely the Japanese market. And it's being dominated by American-owned corporations and some Japanese corporations with middlemen in the Philippines. So you probably heard of Dole pineapple, Stan Philco for banana. They're all across. Now for decades upon decades, the production of banana and the exports of banana has been earmarked for the Japanese market. But the monopoly and in quality control has been done by the Japanese corporate implementers or mill persons up to about few years ago. Now I chance upon some anthropologists working in the banana plantation areas. They're based in Belgium and doing some ethnographic work in the area. They said that there seems to be a change in the banana export pattern, because suddenly there were alternative markets where to export the banana. And this is quite crucial because from one quality control setup that's mainly Japanese, and then who can easily just reject banana output, now it becomes, now there's another quality control setup, and the target for the next for the export was China, and then China has do not have the same quality control engagement as it is in Japan, and that had allowed communities, or allowed growers to actually make a choice where to export the banana. In fact, I've heard from some reports that some of the growers would damage a bit the banana, because anyway the Chinese market wouldn't mind it, and then they began exporting to China, and that sort of shifted the configuration of politics and power in the area. Suddenly, they're no longer dependent on those who holds the political key in the Japanese local market, with China being part of the export orientations. But it led to expansion of banana farms, and that's. But ironically, in these areas, this is the region which is more, let's say, developed comparatively. So it has a rising, shall we say, economy, and wherein conflict has been stamped down. Ironically, in that context, though it's another story in the conflict zone where the banana plantations were set up, but there were also some impact into it. Now, which makes me wonder the impact of. Sorry. Oh yeah. Okay. I'm wrapping up. Okay. So I'm wondering if how much. With this configuration on the ground, how it impacts on question of hunger. Now, for sure, as I've said, the agrarian conflict experience insurgency was brought from these land expansions across, but how it is squaring in the complexity on the ground, and just the thought that how difficult it is for the locals to pin down that part of the problem is actually the expansion of corporate landholding. Now, my last point probably is on, I was very interested with your work with indigenous groups, and what the university is looking at into drawing knowledge from indigenous sources in addressing the climate challenges. We've also been asking about this on to what extent would indigenous knowledge actually address challenges in the coming climate Armageddon, supposedly, given the IPCC reports the fourth IPCC reports that seem to state that what we might be facing, or communities that might be facing and may even be vulnerable, would be the indigenous groups because of the extreme weather events that may not have been, but that may have been uncharted, that may not have been part of the memory and not part of the knowledge system of indigenous communities. So extreme drought and extreme La Nina events that we're seeing, and these are all uncharted territories. So to what extent would adaptability be applicable in the anthropocenic world? And on that matter as well, I'm also wondering if we really bring in indigenous knowledge system into the world, what's the carrying capacity of that knowledge system? For instance, if there would be food-based knowledge systems that would be concentrated in one area, can that be scaled? And what would be the implication of scaling, especially if we're going to address hunger, and what complications might it offer, might emerge within a scaled up indigenous knowledge spread, if we come to that point? Just a thought about it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Canude. Really important questions and comments and reflections, and there's so much to say. I'll just say something briefly, but I would love to continue the conversation. I think in terms of shifting markets and how that shifts food security, I think the bigger question, you're extremely correct in that as we open up a diversity of markets, smallholders, producers have more choice. And that's really important, right? Because it's not dependent on one system of standards or producing food for the global north in the global south at the cost of human lives, human health, and land health. I think whether it's multiple transnationals buying up the food, there's another bigger question, because it goes in line with what also Rector Rojas showed. There's a global economic crisis. There's lower than living wages being paid. People are forced into poverty. And if they have one market or two markets to sell to, oftentimes what's happening is people have to sell their land. And then we add climate change to the mix. And so some years people don't produce at all because of a pest, because of floods, because of drought. And then all they're left, we're seeing this in Central America, all they have left is the option to sell their land and move and migrate. So I definitely think a diversity of markets is important. When you talk about food justice and food sovereignty, often people say food sovereignty activists are against trade, and it's actually not true. That's often to shut down the debate around human rights and producers' rights and consumers' rights. Food sovereignty and food justice is not against trade. It's about fair trade, right? And so diversifying markets, yes, it's important, but it still doesn't address the wider economic structural problems that are causing forced poverty and moving and forcing people off their land, selling land for super cheap prices, and having corporate greed snap up that land and then do what they want with it. Or having people work in Del Monte or Dole. Often people sell their land and then they're stuck working as farm workers in plantations, lower than living wages, conditions that are causing health crises, and there's just no other option. So yes, I think diversifying markets is good, but why also not think about international and local markets, and markets that are safe for producers and consumers? So that's what I would say in that point. And then the second point of scaling up of Indigenous knowledge for climate adaptation, for food security and climate adaptation, as I mentioned in the talk, I think I'll give you this example. I got asked to write a book chapter with an Indigenous colleague in Costa Rica, and they wanted us to write about Indigenous food systems for planetary health. And they said, tell us all the things that Indigenous food systems can do to fight climate change. And my Indigenous colleague said, I can't write that chapter for you, because it's not about what seeds we grow or what seasons we grow them in. It's actually about a different way of looking at land and people. And he said, he explained how his clan system teaches him that certain plants are his ancestors. You treat the land as if you would treat your elders, right? So the farm, the land, the water system is a relative of yours. So first and foremost, I think it's important to know when we're doing IPCC, climate adaptation, environmental crisis adaptation, we cannot just scale up by extracting that knowledge. We have to actually think of the worldview around our relationship to the land. And that's the bigger issue. We have tons of reports on how Indigenous knowledge is important for droughts, for all of these things. And what you said is extremely correct as well. How could we scale it up when maybe certain communities haven't experienced what we're experiencing? And most of the people that I work with are not against combining Western or non-Indigenous knowledge with Indigenous knowledge, so that's definitely a key point. But they also say maybe we haven't experienced these extreme droughts, but what we have been doing through years, hundreds of years of colonization, has been resisting at the margins. So climate adaptation is not just about how to adapt to the environment, it's actually how to adapt to crises. And many marginalized communities have all of these great teachings with solidarity, working with community, coming together and bringing those strengths together. So I think there's a definite interaction between non-Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous knowledge in climate adaptation, but there's a lot more to resistance at the margins that we can draw upon for our adaptation to all crises. And in terms of scaling up, is it possible? I would say, I guess I would ask the other question, do we want to scale up? Or do we want context-specific local solutions, right? Because sometimes scaling up does bring those problems because we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. And so I think some scaling up, definitely. I think there's a lot to learn. I think, what do we have to lose? As I said in my talk, the FAO of the UN just openly said we just can't keep producing food the way we're doing. We're ruining the land and we're harming people. So alternative approaches, alternative knowledges, yes, 100%. scaling up may be with caution and in what circumstances, and ask why before we would do that. I hope that briefly responds to it.
Maybe you could give 2 or 3 ideas compared to comparative studies from indigenous here in Malaysia, with other in Costa Rica and others, because it's how to look in a more global view of the indigenous issue.
In a more, so Rector Rojas is referring to some work that I've done with indigenous communities in Malaysia and indigenous communities in Costa Rica. It was around a 3-year project, and some key lessons. I think the first lesson I would say is this, is that so many people I've worked with said, we're rushing to put indigenous people into development projects, to extract indigenous knowledge, to find out what the problems are and make the solutions immediately. And they've always said to me, at least in these projects, I've been working with development agencies for years of my life, and no development agency has ever sat down slowly, had a conversation one-on-one and says, what does the environment mean to you? What does any question, what does development mean to you? So I'd say one big thing is for us to slow down and to sit down and have these conversations cross-culturally about what these terms mean. What does development mean for different people, and what are their desired outcomes in development? I think that is an overlapping theme that I've seen. I've also seen as Vice Rector Juan Carlos said, the laws exist. The laws exist for indigenous rights globally, nationally, in Malaysia and in Costa Rica. We've ratified international agreements, but unfortunately they're just on paper. We need stronger support for these agreements. So they exist, but we need to put them into practice. And I'd say those would be the 2 main lessons.
Okay, should I go next? All right, thank you. It was really very interesting to listen to you, Vice Rector, because while you were talking, you're saying, all right, Latin America, that's a huge kind of unified, they don't fight among each other. And what is our continent? Our continent is Asia, and we have so much variety. The kind of colonization happened with different, so that you have different colonial overlays on the legal systems of our different countries. So it's quite fascinating to think about that. The second thing, as you were talking about land borders, our problem as an archipelago is that we don't have land, and maybe it's not a problem, maybe it's an advantage, but we don't have land borders, but we have sea borders, except sea borders are much more contentious, as you know, because of the current issue with China and other in the West Philippine Sea. So that's kind of, we're similar and yet really very different as continents. The second thing, you go into human rights as part of the international law. And that is something I think, that connection becomes very important because international law, which very much is reflected by the colonial law that was imposed, and here would it be Spanish and American for the most part, and then the Philippine reactions to it, development of it. But the notion of human rights became an international law issue. It really didn't get into kind of the social science field until much, much later, I think. And now, I think when we talk about human rights, always the issue recently was, that's a European, or that's an outside concept. Some people like to say that. In Singapore, of course, the head of state said that for some time. But I think when you look at grassroots, and this is what everybody is now, you're all saying, what is happening at the people's level? And one thing that's very clear in some of my own research, and I mainly deal with urban poor communities, they have a strong sense of commitment to law and democracy, but they say the way it's managed by the society is that the ones who get all the rights tend to be the middle and upper class, and we get left out. So when you say the rule of law, they rule, but we're the ones who are victimized very often. So that kind of has built up this notion of the cultural divide. We hear that all the time now. and the last election kind of brought out that issue. Is there a whole group of left out people or who feel left out and maybe get back at the fact that they seem to have much less power over many, many years? They may progress a little bit, but they don't really change the structure of power. And the only way they can get back is to vote. You know, the vote is equal. Everybody has a vote. So in a way, a vote is a way that you can get back at a system in which you are not recognized, or you're looked down on by the, you know, kind of an elite middle class, and you're not listened to. When you also have a sense, the urban poor, we know that very well, that what they call the moral economy of the poor, which is carried over from indigenous traditions, from rural traditions also, but you still see it in the 40–50% who are in the urban poor community. And urbanization is a huge issue also for you, as it is for us. But of that urbanization, you know, 30–40% are really poor people who don't have access to the institutions of law, who are really left out because the law is structured on the formal economy, which doesn't fit the moral economy of the poor, where community counts, where people take care, where their insurance comes because they know each other and they help each other. There are lots of fights and conflicts, but you know, the interests of the community become very important for survival. Nobody should die in that community. Somebody will always come to their rescue. But vis-a-vis the middle upper classes, of course, they feel quite left out. I think I happened today to get to read the synod report of the Catholic bishops. You know, normally we don't think of the formal church as the impetus for change, except during the Marcos early period when the theology of liberation brought from Latin America was very strong here. But since then, well, the issues of what is the role of the church, and one could say many things, but when Pope Francis decided, whether 4 years ago, we have to have a synod in October this year, we have to get consultations with the population. I didn't really believe that was going to happen, but I just read the report. It's amazing. They consulted thousands of Filipinos of all groups, you know, from the poorest to mainly poor middle-class people. And the poor really stated, we have been left out. And you said, this is the first time anybody ever asked us anything. You know, so we really are part of the society, they conclude at the end of this discussion. So I think that, you know, when it comes to democracy, they want democracy, but they want it to be a fair democracy where they participate as equals. And I think what you always hear is they look down on us. You know, we even lose our dignity. We don't even have their respect, at least respect. That's the bottom line. So you'll hear that resistance, that undercurrent of the large numbers of poor, but who can't articulate it exactly because they rely for jobs instead, and the society is set up really much against them. If they try to sell in the streets, they're illegal, etc. So when it comes to human rights and law, international law, how does it come down to national levels, and how does it represent what people consider their rights? And they do have very strong convictions about rights. Finally, Rector, you talked about the civil society sector as weakening. Here it goes up and down, depends very much on who is in control of the government, but they're still operating whether local levels and so on. They're the ones, I think, who we have to rely on because they're organizing, and people's organizations, associations of farmers are very strong, but maybe not strong enough. And if we're talking about that people lead the society, that to me is one trend I think we have to really reinforce. Where does the civil society, who are middle class also, but who have a basic commitment, and well, if Pope Francis is right, that these will be the groups that will help everybody come together, you know, as he says, journey together. So I guess that's where I would end with then the question, how do you see the law becoming instrumental to represent the majority poor people's concerns so that they can have a fair say in their own society? How do you make human rights, people's rights writ large? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Maricelis, for your reflections. We'll go through quickly because I know time is really attacking us. Yes, as you mentioned, Latin America is an extraordinary example of unity in social, historical, many elements. And however, all this cultural heritage has not helped anything. I mean, all the analysis says we should be more integrated, should be like the European Union, we should work. But in the cases, all the societies have worked alone in a very, I wouldn't say selfish, but a very nationalistic approach that today, where the division and the fragmentation is in the worst moments in the recent history, is extremely difficult to take all the leaders together in the same table. For whatever reasons, but just to call a meeting and to sit down to discuss about the problems is extremely difficult. So that's one point. Perhaps help us, as we mentioned, to maintain the borders, to keep peaceful relations in that regards. International law and law. Let's go quickly with this. International law is a European construction. And as a European construction was imposed to the rest of the world. We all have to live with, through colonial rules, we all accept international law. I believe in the case of Latin America, it was in the Spanish way, for whatever that means, okay? And then we adapted fairly interesting. And I have learned a lot in UPs how we should decolonize international law. And in UPs, from the point of view of international law, we work hard on this process of decolonization of international law. And the debate with the students has taught me, a lot. For example, in terms of human rights for Latin America, one of the most important moments in the recent history is when the Spanish tribunal asked for the detention of Pinochet in London. Was, one of the highest moments there. And then I remember when I was talking about that, we were so proud in class in UPs. And African students raised their hand and said, but why are you so proud of it? I said, but imagine, a dictator, blah, blah. Is the typical interference of the former colonial power in your domestic affairs. And then I was completely speechless, like, you're right. Yes, you're right. So, it's the type of debate that we have and are extremely fruitful. We need to work hard on that. And going into the law is a political act. And as a political act, reflect the consensus of the society. And as Rector Rojas and Professor Olivia Sylvester show in the two different areas, the consensus of what type of society we want is completely broken. Today we don't know where we're going. I think, as Rector mentioned, the type of society that we're looking for is completely gone. We don't know where we're going. This new leader, this new multilateralism that we see emerging. We see that we're going back into the past for many elements. We all knew that China was a one important power 300 years ago, 400 years ago. India is emerging, but also we have the recent one with Europeans, the Americans. So we are heading to a completely different world, and we don't know what we're going to do. We are trying to hold in this human rights from the individual point of view, but then we have the discussion with Olivia says, but individual human rights, but for what type of society? You cannot consider the human rights as an isolated element. They're part of a society. So I think institutions like Ateneo de Manila and UPs has a huge responsibility. We need to develop new paradigms. We need to develop at least new spaces to debate this topic, because clearly we don't have the answers. We more or less have an idea of the questions, but clearly we have no idea of the answers. Thank you. It's yours, actually.
I think this room needs more microphones and definitely more space at the table. Before we end today, maybe I will do a little bit of teacher mode and maybe just ask some of the audience your reflections. I don't think we can get to all of the answers, especially with the big questions we posed today, but maybe from our audience here, maybe some general reflections on probably what struck you the most with today's conversation. So let's keep this space open also to all of us who are here today. Natatakot na. Do you have anything that you'd like to say about what struck you the most from our speakers' presentations and their reactions? Yeah.
For me, what struck me most was the talk about food justice, because I come from the province where actually it's Nueva Ecija. It's called the rice granary capital of the Philippines. And of course, growing up there as a kid, I always saw how farmers were often, I don't want to say like manipulated, but they always get the shortest end of the stick, because they always get, they sell rice for a small amount, but in corporations, they always charge for like 10 pesos per cup or even more now. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you. And I didn't catch your name. What's your name?
I'm Bianca.
And from, hello, Bianca. And what course are you taking here?
I'm currently taking BS Biology.
So a very interesting mix of a sociological perspective from a biology major. Anyone else here? Let's hear a little bit from, yes, here we go. Let's start with your name naman.
Luke Maverick Ang from BS MIS.
MIS. So Management of Information Systems.
So I'm most likely the same. I'm from the province too. And in that province called South Cotabato, we have a city called Polomolok. And it also happened like pineapple company like Dole. It land grabbed a whole city, I would say. They took a bunch of ancestral land where the natives still fight to get back today. But despite all this, it was more positive. Like the locals think of them as positive since they built hospitals, they built schools, they gave jobs, and most of the people until today there work at Dole. Like, yeah. So they're also active in fighting for labor standards and working conditions. Back in 2017, they issued a cease and desist on a local service cooperative for previous problems like working conditions and labor standards. So most locals have a positive view on the company, different from Latin America's, where Dole is actually perceived negatively. With this, if done right, can land grabbing actually help the community like in Polomolok? If the local community itself doesn't agree with the opposing land grabbers, thinking it would get them out of extreme poverty, like it did with Polomolok, would the negative effects be inevitable? So those are just my reflections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, a very, very local and personal view of all of the very complex issues that our very esteemed group of academics and practitioners, of course, have presented today. I don't know how to close this. I will be honest with you. So I suppose I will close with a very honest thank you for sharing this time and this space with us today, and also with an invitation to continue the conversation. So this is not the end. This is only part one, as Dean Bo Peep has said. So please join us for part 2 of the APS Peace Conversations on a Volatile World, which will feature this time administrators and faculty members of Ateneo de Manila University. We appreciate your participation today and hope to see you again. Good evening, everyone. Sorry.
How we end the conversation this evening with thank yous. Thank you, Melissa. Let me take a minute. Those who have to leave because your parents are already here, or please feel free to do so. But let me take 1 minute to explain what's inside the bag. This is a book. One of the things inside the bag. This is the School of Social Sciences, a product of the School of Social Sciences, in response to the call to broaden, to expand our knowledge production to an area called Mindanao, a region that we usually associate with troubles and all those precarious arrangements that we have discussed today, food insecurity, human insecurity, but also potentials for international law and bringing together dialogues and so on. So this is edited by Jose Joel Canuday, our very own here, and Dr. Joel Sescon, with 9 faculty members from the School of Social Sciences, 43 chapters with other scholars and practitioners from Mindanao. We are very proud to share this book with you, have more knowledge of Mindanao. Thank you. So let me give this to Rector Rojas. Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much. And in this volatile world, we like to continue this debate, hopefully, in Costa Rica.
All right. Thank you, Rector Rojas. Then we have Dean Juan Carlos. Vice Rector Juan Carlos. That was a few months ago. Vice Rector, Dr. Sylvester. And Maya Mizuno. All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope to see you again in our activities for the Asian Peacebuilders Scholarship Program. Thank you.